Welcome to the Re-Entry Archive. Nothing more than a complex bundle of atoms and molecules. An LSD experience report taken from erowid.org. It was a typical Saturday afternoon. A week prior, I had made plans with 3 of my friends to trip on some very potent liquid LSD we had picked up recently. I was given a serious warning from my dealer not to consume more than 3 drops. He sincerely claimed that the vial needed to have a warning label on it because it was such a wicked batch. It was supposedly barely diluted. Being my usual skeptical self, I decided I was going to ignore his advice and go deep to see what beautiful places my mind could take me to. The day seemed all too perfect for anything to mess up, despite the fact that during this time in my life I had had a myriad of personal issues and insecurities. I'm honestly starting to get slightly uneasy even thinking about the experience I'm about to describe. Around 3:30 p.m, my friend, Kay, picked me up from his house. We drove to another friend's house where my personal stash of acid was sitting in the freezer. The LSD was dropped onto sugar cubes. Our plan was to drive to our friend JC's house and enjoy the ride in a safe setting while the people that opted not to trip would smoke marijuana. I walked into his house and saw a couple of my friends there. We briefly conversed and smoked a bowl of top quality CBD-rich sativa marijuana. I pulled 5 sugar cubes out of the freezer and shoved them into my mouth, and then licked a bunch of sugar crumbs off the foil. My friends were a bit shocked I was willing to go that far. They sort of already understood my tendency to consume large quantities of psychedelic drugs. I talked with them for another 10 minutes or so, and then went back to the car. On my way to the car, I noticed I was starting to feel incredibly disorientated. It wasn't that euphoric, confusing sort of disorientation. It was more of a I'm losing my mind sort of thing. I felt slightly anxious, but I assumed the negative feelings would pass soon as the acid took full effect. I suspect this was easily around 1,000 micrograms. I've consumed 100 microgram blotters, but this did not compare to this liquid. On a separate occasion, taking 2 of these was enough for a level 4 experience. The experience was about to get very, very ugly. To give a little perspective on the unfathomable effects of an 1,000 microgram dose, here is a quote from the Nobel Prize-winning chemist Kary Mullis, who ingested 1,000 micrograms for his first dose. When you take 1,000 micrograms of LSD, you don't know you've taken anything. It just feels like that's the way it is. You might suddenly find yourself sitting on a building in Egypt 3,000 years ago, watching boats on the Nile. Yes, it is that crazy. 10 minutes into the car ride, and 20 minutes after eating the sugar cubes, I was rapidly losing touch with reality. I started wondering what was going on around me and why I was feeling so uncomfortable. I started telling my friends I was really scared, and the intense anxiety was gripping every single fibre of my body. I thought I was going to die, and that this trip was going to last until the end of eternity. By the minute, I was starting to panic more. This was only the beginning of an unimaginable nightmare that would show me the evil side of LSD and completely change my opinion about the drug in general. 25 minutes after taking the sugar cubes, we arrived at JC's house. By that time, I was stumbling all over the place, and I was already having severe visual distortion. All movements were followed by strobing trails composed of detailed patterns, kaleidoscopes, and rainbows. These visuals, that are usually considered beautiful, were now viewed as a reminder that I was in the middle of a trip that I so desperately wanted to end. When I got inside his house, I saw a few more friends sitting on the couch. My body temperature had elevated to the point that I thought I was burning alive. I was completely out of my body, and it almost felt like a high dose of ketamine. I felt embarrassed, because I obviously looked like I couldn't handle myself. But maybe this was just an extreme amplification of my general self-esteem issues. Their faces assumed demonic forms. I fled to JC's room. I was already starting to experience ego loss. I was going in and out of consciousness. This was the point where I lost track of time, so there is no point trying to estimate anything. JC followed me to his room and did his best to comfort me and talk me out of my bad trip. It was a completely ineffective attempt. A couple minutes later, I started crying hysterically. Everything was getting darker. I fell into the most depressive state of my life, combined with the most acute sense of panic I've ever experienced. The floor was covered in spiraling kaleidoscopes that were rapidly shifting colours. I heard thousands of voices call me names. The room reeked of sewage and feces. This was the most negative emotion a human being could ever fathom. I realised that the voices were of all the people I resented in my life the most. Cartoon blood was all over the ceiling and the walls. My vision seemed to stretch off into infinity. I was hallucinating so much I couldn't believe it. I could see so many different events of my life playing out as if waking reality. Try and imagine being inside a Saw movie firsthand, but 1,000 times more horrifying and traumatic. There was a moment in which my mind would shoot out of my body 2 feet in front of me, and then return into my body. This looped over and over again for what felt like forever at an impossible speed. Time was non-existent, and a second felt like forever. Not hours, not days, but an infinite amount of time. I kept hearing this bizarre futuristic noise that sounded like a computer glitching. The whole room was flashing, as if someone was flicking on a lamp. My jaw was rapidly vibrating, like I had taken 300 milligrams of MDMA. I had full-blown synesthesia. Everything was one. Everything was infinitely interconnected. I would look at the walls and become the walls. I would look at the floor and become the floor. I was unable to differentiate any part of the outside world from my own physical body. The concept of I was now a mere construct of my mind, and I was nothing more than a complex bundle of atoms and molecules. The floor started to wither away and die. It was as if it had human emotions and was feeling every bit of suffering I was going through at the time. Everything started to turn blood red. I was going straight to the depths of hell. Matrix numbers were literally exploding out of the ground and shooting up and down the walls. It felt like I was on DMT, only 1,000 times more intense. Somehow, just a little while after this part of the trip, I regained some degree of consciousness. I stumbled into the backyard, where a group of 8 or so people were sitting and watching the sky. Everything in my external environment was turning black and red. I could barely see anything. My vision was almost completely shot. I forgot that I even had a body at this point. I had absolutely no control over my muscular movements. I was in this survival mode where my mind was on autopilot, and I had no idea that I was on drugs. I lost balance and fell backwards onto the ground. I continued to see more incredible vortexes of matrix-style numbers and letters spurt out in every direction. During my friends' attempts to help restore me to sanity, they asked if I knew what time it was. I responded, "It's 8 a.m, when in fact it was late in the afternoon. This was quite enough of a response to prove that I was completely and utterly going nuts, and there was no real way to help me. Once night fell, I was full on peeking in JC's room. I began to literally have no idea who I was, where I was, or what drug I was on. I knew that I was going to die, and nothing could be done to stop it. At some point, at the beginning of the peak, I realized that I could not recognize the room I was in. Suddenly I started seeing several cop cars pull into the room and put their sirens on. Yellow caution tape magically appeared around them. This was one of my worst nightmares coming to life before my very eyes. There was a line of already arrested criminals in handcuffs next to the cop cars, and they were all complaining that I had snitched on them for some unspecified reason. I knew I was in for absolute hell. Before I could see what was going to happen next, everything started to fade to white. I could see nothing but burning white light, like I was looking directly at the sun from 100 feet away. What I saw was the ultimate truth, the answer to every question, the reason reality is the way it is. I existed within the past, present, and future simultaneously. I couldn't see my own hands in front of my face. I dissolved into infinity. I was existing in an infinite number of dimensions, living an infinite number of lives simultaneously for an infinite number of time. Though my memory of this is hazy, I believed I relived every event of my entire life during the peak. I could fit our entire universe into a period at the end of a sentence. Time was a point of nothingness. I was everything, yet I was nothing. I was in pure ecstasy. I felt the unconditional love of the universe penetrating every pore of my body. If only this could have lasted forever. I suppose this was the taste of the beautiful part of ego death. But my stay in this ineffable place was cut short when I was suddenly catapulted into hyperspace. where I experienced every ounce of pain any human being could ever possibly experience, all at once. The love rapidly shifted to evil in its purest definition. I saw many miserable people I had seen throughout my life, including the homeless and starving. My brain's sensory filter was gone. Every last bit of information that could physically be processed at once was flowing through my head at light speed. I was dropped out of hyperspace directly into a hallucination of a prison facility. I saw hundreds of pit bulls, white supremacists, and naked men running around. I was in a state of sheer pandemonium. I have never been so unbelievably horrified in my entire life. I was sobbing hysterically for it to stop. It was physical and emotional torture beyond your wildest dreams. Who knows how long this actually went on for, but eventually the torture ended and I was back in JC's room. I saw all of my friends' faces covered in knife wounds and deep bleeding cuts. Puddles of blood were all over the room. My joints were in severe pain from the physical torture I had just experienced. I looked at the clock. It read 9 p.m. Minutes after I came back to Earth, I realized that the purpose for human existence was to love. Love is our higher purpose. I now understood that the ego I had developed my entire life was an illusion all along. Our egos push us away from our ability to feel compassion towards others. As your ego fades away, you slowly dissolve into pure, unadulterated love. The illusion of separation created by our egos has been the root cause of all suffering all across our planet, and sadly, this is the reason the majority of the world murders each other for absurd purposes like religion and resources. Religions like Christianity hide behind the idea that there is an afterlife because they are afraid of death. There is nothing to fear, because when you die, there is no you to fear anything. The only thing that separates us from other forms of life is our ability to think. Our ego is composed of thoughts. When we stop relying on our ego, we cannot experience negative emotions. When we stop thinking, our ego ceases to exist, and then we can live a life of pure love, peace, and prosperity. The more we rely on our ego, the more we push ourselves away from the moment, which is all. Nothing outside the moment we are in right now will ever exist. Yesterday never is, and tomorrow never will be. Time is infinite. The past, present, and future are all occurring simultaneously. We are merely observers. Free will is an illusion. This was by far the most profound experience of my entire life. I quickly forgot all of these things within 15 minutes of the peak ending. I didn't fully understand the lessons I'd learned until months after the trip. The next day was easily the worst of my life. I was thoroughly convinced that I had ruined my life permanently. During ego death, I became aware of the severity of my many mental disorders. I realised that throughout my life, I had been looked down upon as the special kid. I had not been aware of this until that moment. I felt like the most inferior form of life on the face of the earth. After I got home, I burst into tears. Even though my family felt sorry for me and pitied me, I felt this was because they thought I was a moron. I had a psychotic break for weeks afterwards. This was easily the most traumatic thing I'd ever gone through in my entire life, and has left a lasting mark on me, which I still carry to this day. It's been over 6 months now, and I think about this trip every day of my life. It's nothing any human being deserves, and I would not wish this on my worst enemy. Over time, this trip has had a profound effect on all areas of my life, in both positive and negative ways. Positive. I have very close friends now, and rather than the special kid, many people view me as insightful and intelligent. Before this experience, I had very, very few friends. I wasn't close friends with anyone. I now know what true friendship is. I go to parties and I meet new people all the time. I suspect that I used to have a mild form of autism, and this trip literally eradicated it. My entire family has mentioned multiple times that I am a transformed person. I have fully developed social skills. I act normally now. I view everyone I meet as part of my own consciousness. I've earned excellent grades at my community college and have grown tremendously. Multiple people have commented that I am an entirely different person now. I've taken up Buddhism and have adopted a very spiritual lifestyle. Negative. Several months ago, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I suspect I was already predisposed to this condition, and the trip brought it out. I still have flashbacks nearly every day, and have been scarred by this experience. I frequently have nightmares about this trip. My thoughts can be very scattered and clouded at times. My thinking is very impaired on some days, but it's very sporadic. I've learned how messed up our world is, and sometimes I feel that ignorance is bliss. Our society disgusts me. I think that the human race is a joke. I'm going to say one more thing. Do not take a high dose of acid unless you have a proper set and setting, or it can turn into the worst nightmare of your entire life. 300 micrograms is more than enough to have a spiritual experience. 1,000 plus micrograms did not provide a near-death experience. It provided a beyond-death experience. LSD is a seriously powerful drug, and it has the ability to damage a person like nothing they could ever conceive of. In fact, after this experience, I firmly believe that it is the most powerful drug ever known to the human race. You don't have to have lived through an experience to learn from it. So let's take a few moments to reflect upon what this journey might mean. The oscillation between light and dark during this experience may symbolize a conflict between the self and the shadow. The white light brought about a sense of peace and unity, whilst the darkness was hellish and torturous. The shadow gave way to visions of blood and oppression and judgment, perhaps a symbolic representation of repressed shame or fear, or even societal rejection. To integrate these elements, the traveller may wish to return to the feelings that coincided with these visions and ask themselves where they originate from. Saying this, by the end of the report, it does seem as though the traveller has already started doing some of this integration work. Late in the journey, there was a moment of ego death, followed by a clinging to the bliss that came along with it. These experiences are to be enjoyed, of course, and feelings of pleasure, bliss, and euphoria are all important parts of the therapeutic process. However, it should be remembered that ego death is not enlightenment. The dissolution of the ego may be useful in facilitating the breaking down of cognitive barriers and the highlighting of perceptual bias. But in waking consciousness, the ego serves a useful role, and so the aim is not to destroy the ego, but to recognize it for what it is, to become aware of its shortcomings and limitations, and to integrate it into the self. The most significant lesson from this experience is one of respect. This is both respect for these substances, but also respect for the self. Eyeballing a dose like this, especially after being warned about potency, is incredibly irresponsible. Not only that, but set and setting were poorly considered here, and this traveller put his companions in a difficult situation through his own carelessness. He was very lucky. These substances are powerful, but they must be respected. The goal isn't to consume as much as humanly possible, but to take only what is needed. The point of the hike is to experience the climb and the view from the top. But a local hill will serve this purpose. You do not have to climb Mount Everest. But if you do, make certain that you are doing it for yourself and that you understand the risks you are taking.